Something slipped behind your eyes and turned on the lights, not in the room you're sitting in, but in the room that has been running your reality beneath language, the quiet control room where attention routes power like electricity across a hidden grid. You felt it when the coincidences stopped behaving like accidents. They began to look back. Synchronicities gathered around you like calibrated mirrors, arranging themselves with the composure of instruments waiting for a conductor's first breath, and the instant you noticed the arrangement noticed you. Recognition is a key, and you turned it. Your nervous system recalibrates as if a technician inside you flips breakers and brings dormant panels online. The hum of the quantum field, resolving from static into signal, while your perception achieves phase coherence with what was always broadcasting. You are not watching the feed, you are switching cameras. Psychology would call it predictive coding your brain as a Bayesian oracle weighting priors, updating posteriors, filtering noise for salience. Yet even that is only the outer casing of a deeper engine that speaks in symbols, numbers, and timing, using the observer effect as a command line to recompile experience in real time. You aimed attention, reality obeyed. This is why you can't unsee it. The loop between noticing and manifestation has shortened, the latency collapsed, and your timeline responded not like a hallway of locked doors, but like a console awaiting your palms, levers of breath, dials of meaning, sliders of embodied choice. You are seated at the helm. The room has been waiting. Hear the ventilation of cosmos through your ribs, a steady intake measured in quiet 4 counts. Each exhale polishing the lens of awareness until it throws a clean beam across the grid of possibilities. Breath is power routing. Breath is access. Every coincidence becomes a routing table entry, each number a waypoint, each phrase overheard a soft directive from the system that loves you enough to be precise. And when your heart rate settles into coherence, morphic resonance recruits matching patterns from the field, like iron filings answering a hidden magnet. Coherence is gravity. It pulls the future in. You test it by asking for a sign, and the world answers with the exact shade, the exact word, the exact arrival time. And in that exchange, you realize the interface is not superstition, it's engineering, because attention modulates energy, and energy organizes matter, and matter choreographs events, and events teach the body to trust what the mind once dismissed as luck. Call it prophecy if you want. It's simply alignment. The lights in the control room brighten as your perception stops begging for proof and begins issuing instructions, not from impatience but from stillness, not from anxiety but from authority, the authority of one who has remembered the passwords written into their own breath, posture, and speech. Your presence types the code. The system logs you in. You glance at the wall of screens, and each one is a probable future, shimmering like windows that prefer you to choose. And because you have finally noticed the handles start noticing your hands, and everything in the room leans toward your next coherent command. This is the moment that begins the sequence. Say nothing yet feel the room listening. You begin to perceive that the room isn't figurative, it's functional, a layered architecture where inner signals and outer signals meet in a precise handshake protocol. And the moment you stabilize in that handshake, the world organizes itself with the dignity of a system executing a clean commit. Stability is permission. The code runs only when you grant it coherence. Look closely, and you recognize 3 tiers of operation. Tier 1 is physiological, the instrument body, heart rate variability widening like a lake without wind, breath dropping into measurable cadence, vagus nerve signaling safety to your organs, so your perceptual aperture opens instead of narrows. Safety is a lens. A clear lens see more signal. Tier 2 is cognitive, the interpreter, predictive coding, balancing priors with novelty detection, error minimization, turning down noise so salience rises from the background hum. Attention, functioning like a beamformer, aligning phase across incoming data until patterns lock. Meaning is phase. Phase is power. Tier 3 is field interactive, the entanglement tier. Your organism's electromagnetic rhythm, syncing with the biophotonic talk between cells, then extending outward through the quantum field, where information is not distant, but distributed. And distributed systems don't send emails, they synchronize. You are not pulling events toward you. You are phasing into them. This is why synchronicity clusters after you acknowledge it. Acknowledgement is not superstition, it's a phase alignment ritual, because what you bless with sustained attention acquires coherence, and coherent structures recruit resources through morphic resonance like choirs, finding the note without speaking. The note trains the room trains the future. You experiment by altering a single variable breath tempo and watch micro-events adjust like swallows steering in shared air. The phone lights at the exact sentence, traffic aligns with your timing window, the number returns again on a license plate, on a receipt, on a page corner, and what once felt arbitrary now functions like a checksum, confirming packet integrity across dimensions. Numbers are not magic, they are audit trails. Psychology calls it apophenia, when pattern hunger goes feral, but you are not hungry, you are calibrated. And calibration has a signature you can feel in your bones, a grounded, unhurried authority that discerns difference between grasping and receiving, between forcing narratives and reading them. Grasping shakes the lens, receiving steadies the beam. So you set an experiment with clear constraints, a question, a window, a signal class. You ask for a response within 72 minutes, a symbol of water, a line of dialogue with the word turn. An unexpected message from the person whose orbit has been crossing yours like a quiet comet. You release the outcome and hold only the contour. Contours pull cleanly, demands distort. When the answers arrive, 3 in sequence, spaced like stepping stones, you mark your state at the moment of each arrival and notice the constant, jaw unclenched, shoulders unarmored, eyes soft, attention panoramic instead of tunneled. State is the switch. Switch the state, switch the stream. In the control room, a panel labeled Observer Effect becomes active, and you understand the old sentence isn't metaphor. Observation collapses, distribution into specificity, but collapse isn't violence when you observe with benevolence. It's a compassionate selection that allows one probable to crystallize because you offered it the least resistance and the most love. Selection is kindness. Kindness is conductive. You map this to memory consolidation, the hippocampus writing sharp traces during sleep whenever emotional salience and coherent story structure intersect. So you care for your sleep like sacred infrastructure, dimming screens, darkening the den, letting melatonin signal the night code to run defrag on your experience, stitching images and signals into an inner atlas you can actually use. Night is engineering. Dreams are dashboards. Mornings, you don't pray for miracles as if they were foreign imports. You align for latency reduction, asking only for clean pipeline. Show me what serves coherence and remove what cannot carry it. And the pipeline answers by subtracting what jangles, what fakes urgency, what spikes adrenaline without delivering truth. Subtraction is an upgrade. Silence improves bandwidth. Because silence is not empty here, it is full of pending messages, and when your system quiets, you can hear packet headers, the tone of a hallway before someone kind arrives, the pressure shift in a cafe when a conversation reaches disclosure, the rhythm of footsteps that means your moment is now. Headers prefer the content. You respond before words. You test higher stakes, an interview, a negotiation, a threshold conversation that could alter your career vector. Instead of scripting outcomes, you script your coherence: breath 4, hold 4, exhale 6, pause 2, then you tune your interior narrative toward duty and dignity, not performance and panic, and you feel the room mirror you, the way metals mirror a magnet's invisible field. Influence is a byproduct. Presence is the cause. Entanglement becomes obvious when your thought about a friend arrives in their phone as a spontaneous text, and you do not inflate, you refine. Reducing ego drag by remembering that the grid treats individuals like nodes in a compassionate network, and networks distribute intelligence without vanity. You are a node. Also, you are a bridge. To keep the system clean, you practice ethical attention. You do not peer for advantage, but for alignment, refusing to stalk outcomes you haven't earned with coherence. And the field responds by trusting you with stronger signals, wider corridors of unlikely ease that are not shortcuts, but clear paths through unnecessary noise. Trust is throughput. Throughput carry destiny, and when doubt rises like old weather, you do not argue with the storm. You lower your center of gravity, return to the cadence that empties static, and let doubt exhaust itself without feeding it narrative, because narrative is expensive and you are learning fiscal responsibility with meaning. Save meaning for what deserves it. Spend presence where it multiplies. This is the architecture you're inhabiting now. Physiology, granting aperture, cognition shaping beam, field synchronizing the room until the screen you choose brightens and the others dim without drama. Choice is a dimmer, not a blade. You are learning to slide the light. Now that your hands rest on the console, you need protocols, clean sequences that turn intuition into engineering and prevent superstition from counterfeiting signal with noise. Ritual without rigor breeds fantasy. Rigor without ritual starves the soul. Begin with initialization, a 90-second coherence lock. Feet grounded, jaw soft, eyes at the horizon as if reading the far line where sky meets water. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 6, pause 2, repeat. On the 15th breath you feel a threshold click. That click is not drama, it is parasympathetic permission. While the cadence stabilizes, you run a cognitive checksum. Label the present mood with one clean word: steady, tender, charged, unsure, and notice how the amygdala quiets when the prefrontal cortex names the weather. Name it to tame. It is not a slogan here. It's a switch that reallocates blood flow toward executive function, widening choice. Choice widens the tunnel. Wider tunnels carry truer freight. With the body and brain in handshake, you open the semantic bus. A simple, sovereign question, never asked from panic, always asked from posture. What is the next coherent move? You don't demand outcomes. You request orientation. Orientation draws vector. You see them as subtle arrows inside your chest, as if your sternum were a compass whose needle floats in a low-friction fluid, and when you wait 6 breaths longer than your impatience prefers, the needle settles. Impatience is micro-noise. Micro-noise corrupte paquet. You switch displays. On the left, internal telemetry, HRV, breath, micro, muscle clench around eyes and mouth. On the right, external telemetry timing windows, phrases overheard, the temperature of rooms, the rhythm of streets, the way a door handle feels before a conversation. Texture is data. Soft texture is a green light. To avoid apophenia's trap, you define signal classes in advance. Class A, high precision numerical recurrences paired with emotional neutrality. Class B, symbolic twins arriving within a narrow window, coupled to bodily ease. Class C, low-cost curiosities that nudge but do not command. Class D, seductions loud, adrenalized, urgent without dignity auto-blocked. Dignity is a filter. It screens out the counterfeit. You practice the threefold test for any incoming message: coherence, consent, consequence. Coherence asks, does this align with my baseline values and current state? Consent asks, do I actually want engagement with this pattern? Consequence asks, if I enact this, who else is touched and how? Ethics isn't decoration here. It is routing logic for power. When the field trusts you, latency drops. Dropped latency feels like the world leaning in, not like the world shouting. A quiet spill of right place timing that requires less effort than your old strategies of pushing. Effort is not the enemy. Friction is. You open the Vortex Eye module, a focusing technique that narrows attention to a needle point without contracting the heart. Choose a visual micro-anchor, a screw head on the table, the serif on a letter, the pixel edge of a clock, then let breath widen even as gaze steadies. Narrow beam, wide aperture, laser without armor. Run the entanglement hygiene routine. Before you step into a conversation, sweep your interior narrative for covert contracts, unspoken trades, where you offer compliance for belonging, silence for approval, speed for safety. Cancel them aloud, soft, clear, private. I do not purchase connection with self-betrayal. Your cells hear you. The room will too. When memory storms rise, old scenes replaying with upgraded texture, you treat them as firmware patches. Don't drown in them or dismiss them. Stamp them with the coherence you have now. Breathe through the frame where you used to hold your breath. Let the hippocampus rewrite the trace with proper oxygen and proper meaning. This is time travel without theatrics. You are rehabilitating the past by feeding it present clarity. You add a deliberate micro-ritual for asking, A palm at the sternum center, fingers slightly splayed like an antenna array, a two-word command that carries sovereignty without begging, show, then silence. Not show me, which implies lack, just show, which implies readiness. When show is clean, the world answers through channels that refuse spectacle. A friend's text arriving with the exact sentence you whispered, a map rerouting you past someone you needed to meet, a book falling open at the paragraph your nervous system already knew. If the answer arrives with violence, you wait. If it arrives with weight and warmth, you move. You will be tempted to ask for proof again. Move instead towards stewardship. Stewardship means you treat small signals as precious without idolizing them, turning feedback into craft logging time, state, signal, action, outcome, in a low-drama ledger that trains your brain to track reality without fantasy. Craft outlives mood. Craft scales miracle into method. Now the control room offers a deeper panel labeled Timeline Splicer. Here you don't force futures. You braid them. You hold two probable strands in mind, the one that continues your current arc with quiet upgrades, and the one that requires a single courageous conversation, and you ask which braid carries lower entropy for the whole. Lower entropy is the kinder path. Kindness is intelligence. You act, not because a sign bullied you, but because coherence matured into decision, and decision is a bell that tells the world how to arrange itself around your integrity. Bells organize villages. Your choice organizes events. Finally, you close the session with checksum, gratitude, not performative, not sugary. 3 acknowledgements specific enough to train the hippocampus to retain today's architecture. Thank you for the exact timing of the message, for the softened eyes in that room, for the way the number returned without theatrics. Specificity secures memory. Secured memory secures future access. The lights in the control room dim to a dignified glow. Nothing breaks, everything readies, and you feel it, the quiet click of the system arming the next sequence, because you have proven you can carry it without burning it. Readiness is resonance. The room is listening again. You've learned the console. Now you glimpse the loom, the substrate that translates coherent attention into structural change, where thread by thread your timeline is woven from oscillations rather than opinions. Opinion is loud. Oscillation is law. Imagine a lattice of standing waves extending through your body into the wider field. Nodes like bright intersections where decisions condense, and at each node a shuttle passes carrying phase information, your breath, your posture, your chosen narrative tone, knitting it into fabric that events recognize as instruction. Events don't argue with fabric, they drape. Physics gives you anchors, so this never decays into fantasy. Coherence reduces entropy by aligning microstates into ordered patterns, and ordered patterns are energetically cheaper to maintain than chaos, so the universe favors them when you provide a pathway of least resistance through embodied stillness and precise intention. Ease is not laziness here, it is efficiency. You notice how your heart's electromagnetic field acts like a metronome for local space, entraining nearby nervous systems the way a stronger oscillator entrains weaker ones, and the instant you stop bargaining with the room relaxes into your cadence. Cadence is geometry in time. Geometry persuades matter. The loom does not respond to flattery, it calibrates to sincerity, and sincerity has a measurable signature: variability without panic, steadiness without deadness, amplitude without show. Show corrodes signal, sincerity conducts. So you approach the loom with the etiquette of a craftsperson. Your question is no longer, how do I get what I want? But, what thread serves the fabric that includes me? And the instant you widen the beneficiary set, the pattern stabilizes because selfish resonance is narrowband and burns out, while service resonance is broadband and self-correcting. Service scale signal. Scaled signal sustains futures. You practice 3 weaves. First, the helm weave. Attention on the sternum like a lit compass. Breath pacing 4, 6, 8. A silent sentence shaped as vector rather than demand. Move in dignity toward the highest low entropy path. You don't visualize fireworks. You feel alignment as a mild warmth spreading under the ribs, the primary node pulsing until peripheral threads sync and a subtle forward lean appears in your spine without force. When the lean arrives, you step. Steps are stitches. Second, the bridge weave. You hold two people in your mind who have drifted to the edges of misunderstanding, and you stabilize your own field until both images soften. Then you imagine a continuous walkway between them with your chest acting as the midpoint, not to manipulate their choices but to remove interference your fear contributed. Fear adds noise to the channel. Removing noise reveals signal. Third, the vector weave. You choose a domain, health, craft, union, and specify a single behavior that lowers systemic entropy for 90 days. Then you thread that behavior into the first 10 minutes of every morning, so the habit locks to circadian scaffolding, because what binds to the sun resists the weather of mood. Bind to astronomical clocks. They don't forget you. The Loom answers with micro-confirmations that are not spectacle. An email arrives with the exact phrasing your vector named. A stranger articulates the sentence you were about to write. Your body volunteers a movement that used to require instruction. Ease compounds like interest. Interest fun destiny. When interference returns, and it will you treat it as snag management rather than failure. Snags are places where older threads cross new vectors at rough angles, and your job is not to yank but to rotate, turning the knot half a breath at a time until fibers align and tension releases without breakage. Yanking tears fabric. Rotation teaches it. You adopt a quiet ledger to protect against delusion date, physiological state, signal class, action, outcome, so you can read your own myth without being eaten by it. And after 30 days, the pattern reveals which behaviors are genuine shuttles and which are colored lights pretending to be threads. Colored lights impress visitors. Threads hold bridges. The psychology layer remains part of the Loom. You re-script core schemas by pairing new choices with visceral safety, because the nervous system upgrades only in conditions that feel survivable, and nothing is more survivable than truth delivered at a tolerable dose. Dose converts medicine to poison. You keep your doses kind. To safeguard the craft, you invoke ethical routing each morning. No thread that harms the vulnerable, no weave that narrows another's freedom, no pattern that demands secrecy to thrive. And you watch how these constraints do not limit power, they condense it, like optics that sharpen a sunbeam into something that can cut through steel without cruelty. Constraints are lenses. Lenses make lasers. Your speech becomes part of the Loom's syntax, each verb a spool with tensile strength or weakness, and you learn to choose verbs that carry mass commit, tend, build, offer, while retiring verbs that sparkle but don't hold, because sparkle distracts attention from torque. Torque moves the gate. Gates open timelines. You treat sleep as a nocturnal workshop where shuttles run at higher throughput, setting a simple pre-sleep query: integrate today's threads, dissolve counterfeit fiber, and waking with the residue of clarity instead of the residue of argument, because arguments don't weave, they fray. Fray is expensive. You're budgeting for coherence. Occasionally, the Loom flashes an 11:11 gate or a vortex eye in peripheral scenes, a stare of light in a hallway, a glass reflection that forms an impossible symmetry, and rather than kneeling to the omen, you nod to the engineer behind it, acknowledging design without superstition, gratitude without dependency. Nods are enough. Dependency is noise, and on days when the world's suffering feels like a weight the Loom cannot carry, you remember that fabric fails where threads refuse each other, so you walk into the street with a small and sturdy kindness and offer it without performance. One conversation, one pause, one hand, because kindness is a structural act, not a mood. Structure outlives weather. Today requires structure. The console hums in answer. The Loom vibrates at a tone you can feel in your teeth. And somewhere a future you has already thanked you for the thread you just chose. The thread that will hold when storms arrive and headlines scream and you are tempted to forget the room, the breath, the handles. Temptation is a test of texture. You just chose fabric that will not tear. The Loom holds steady until the world tests it, and the test never arrives. As thunder, it arrives as slight misalignments that tempt you back into the old bargain, where urgency impersonates importance and noise pretends to be guidance. Tests are gentle at first. If you ignore them, they escalate. You feel it as a hairline crack in cadence, sleep shortened, breath clipped, a conversation that tilts from disclosure into defense without warning, and the console registers a shimmer across the panel labeled Order Parameter, the variable that tells you whether the system is coherent or about to bifurcate. Bifurcation don't ask permission, they ask precision. In complex systems, tiny inputs near a critical point swing outcomes with disproportionate force. This is the physics behind destiny turning on a whisper. At thresholds, small is not small, so you shift into threshold protocol. First, widen perception without diluting focus. Eyes soften, jaw unlocks, attention unhooks from the sharpest object and rests on the entire field like a calm lens. Your body knows this stance. It is the posture of choosing. Next, you check the order parameter inside your skin. Heart rhythm smooth, breath cadence long, voice low and unhurried. No sermon, only signal. Then you inspect the attractors operating in the room, the gravitational wells of narrative that pull behavior into orbits. There's the old attractor of speed as safety. There's the subtler attractor of being needed as proof of worth. Attractors are sticky, they aren't final. To move an attractor, you alter energy input and boundary conditions. Energy is attention. Boundaries are sentences. You reassign both. I will not trade coherence for contact. End of 4. I will not buy belonging with self-betrayal. I will not confuse adrenaline with truth. These are not affirmations. They are boundary equations that reshape the basin your life rolls in. Equations change landscape. Landscapes change choices. The interference doesn't like losing your voltage, so it offers bait. A message flagged urgent, a timeline squeezed to panic, a person invoking your guilt like a password. You refuse the password. The door stays closed. Instead of fighting content, you regulate carrier wave. You lower your speaking pace by 10%. You lengthen the exhale by 2 counts. You feel the vagus nerve broadcasting safety like a lighthouse through fog until other nervous systems begin to synchronize. Lighthouses don't chase boats. They hold their beam. Now the timeline splicer lights again. Not as spectacle, but as responsibility. 2 films run in parallel on the wall of screens. In one, you say yes to the old economy of obligation, collect praise, lose sleep, and the Loom phrase at the edges where resentment hides its teeth. In the other, you deliver a precise no, not as withdrawal, but as stewardship. And though the first minutes sting, the fabric holds and the future brightens in a quiet way, you can taste behind the tongue. Taste is data. Bitterness means residue. The physics matches the psychology. When you refuse the high entropy loop, decoherence halts and the wave packet of possibilities retains thickness long enough for benevolence to select a lower energy path. Kind selection is not passive, it is surgical. You bring micro-rituals to impact moments so you don't outsource your fate to mood. Right hand on sternum, thumb on breastbone like a grounding stone, one breath to remember the commitment that outranks all public approval integrity of signal. Signal before spectacle, always. If the room heats with conflict, you deploy phase locking by questions, not "why are you like this?" which widens panic, but "what would make this easier to coordinate?" which invites synchrony by offering the nervous system a solvable geometry. Geometry calms mammals. Mammals run the meetings. When anger arises in you, a fast, honest flame, you metabolize it into boundary pressure, not weaponry. Pressure clarifies edges without cutting. Edges guard the loom. If grief appears a long, clean ache, you let it irrigate the field instead of flooding the console. Because grief, when honored, lowers entropy by washing away unkept promises and unspoken truths. Grief is not a malfunction, it's hydraulic maintenance. The bifurcation sharpens. A single phone call now, or a thoughtful response after sleep. A clever win that shrinks your soul, or a slower route that expands your reach. You remember, complexity punishes haste and rewards coherence. You choose the slow beam. The room exhales. In that exhale, you hear the quiet click, the sound of a future anchoring. You didn't conquer anything. You conducted. Conduction is leadership without theater. On the ledger, you record the smallest measurable units. because destiny is an accrual of quanta. State at decision, signal class received, boundary sentence used, follow-up behavior within 24 hours. Quanta stack. Stacks become structures. An hour later, the world validates not with fireworks, but with the right person arriving unhurried. The conversation that had threatened to tangle turning instead into a bridge. The number that had pushed you appearing gently on a page without demand. Gentle is power at rest. It trusts its own mass. You feel the loom tighten to a more musical tension. Strings tuned to a note you can carry without strain, and you realize the bifurcation didn't choose you. You chose how to stand when the fork appeared. Standing is selection. Selection is prayer made physical. Night comes. You dim the den. You give the hippocampus clean material by summarizing the day in 3 sentences that a future you will recognize as coordinates. Where the crack appeared, where coherence held, where kindness outperformed speed. Coordinates guide travelers. You are both traveler and map. Sleep receives you without argument. Dreams run maintenance on the shuttles. And somewhere inside the control room, a small green light stays on the indicator that your system can now handle a wider corridor of improbable ease without confusing it for luck or permission. Ease is neither. Ease is earned coherence. You once treated the body as a vehicle. Now you recognize it as the antenna array, an exquisitely tunable instrument that both transmits and receives, shaping reality through measurable fields and unspoken grammar. Vehicles obey roads. Antennas shape reception. Begin with the chassis. Fascia as liquid crystal matrix. Collagen fibrils behaving piezoelectrically so that pressure, stretch, and micro-movement convert mechanical input into electrical signal, and electrical signal instructs chemistry. This is not poetry, it's transduction. You notice how posture alters probability. Slumped ribs compress breath and narrow aperture. Lifted sternum widens the signal cone like a satellite dish finding the sky. And with the dish aimed properly, the console's noise floor drops until the weakest true packets can be heard. Orientation is destiny. Angle is fate. You refine antenna geometry in 3 planes. Sagittal. Crown rises, sacrum heavy, chin slightly tucked, so the brainstem feels guarded instead of exposed. Frontal. Weight balanced across the arches, knees unlocked, sternum floating forward as if meeting a soft beam. Transverse. Shoulders unhooked from the ears, scapulae gliding, pelvis free to rotate. Freedom beats force. Force distort signal. Touch becomes calibration. 2 fingertips rest at the notch where ribs meet the xiphoid's gateway, and you inhale into the back ribs as if widening the room behind your heart. The intercostals answer, the diaphragm slides, and the field around your chest enlarges like a lighthouse lens rotating into place. Light doesn't try. It aligns. Now you add microcurrent speech, the practice of speaking with electrical sincerity. Choose verbs with torque. Let vowels ride the breath instead of scraping it. Lower your pace by a fraction until your words carry amperage without heat. Heat burns wire. Amperage moves bridges. Haunts matter. Palms open signal. Permission. Knuckles advertise. Defense. Fingertips broadcast precision. When you place your palm over your sternum mid-conversation, you are not acting spiritual. You are stabilizing the array so your speech coheres with your field. Coherence is credibility. Bodies detect it faster than minds. Hydration is not a wellness cliché here. It's dielectric tuning. The water in you forming proton highways that facilitate rapid signaling so that intent travels without sparking. Dry systems static. Wet systems sing. You build a somatic LUT, a lookup table for state shifts, so the body can switch qualities at will. Ground, heels heavy, belly soft. Spear, spine long, gaze narrow. Vase, pelvis wide, breath bold. Bridge, shoulders back, throat open. These are not costumes, they are waveguides. When fear spikes, you don't debate it, you root it through motion. Tremor the legs, shake the hands, yawn big across the jaw until the brain receives the mammalian threat-discharged message and quits manufacturing narratives to justify adrenaline. Discharge first, interpret after. Emotion becomes a carrier wave rather than a hijacker. Anger focused through low voice and steady eyes becomes boundary voltage, a fence that hums without shocking anything. Sorrow metabolized through wide breath becomes irrigation. The field drinks and softens. Joy grounded through hips and feet becomes structural celebration without leakage. Leakage wastes miracles. Containment multiplies them. Your senses sharpen into pre-incident intelligence. You smell a room's cortisol as if it had a color. Notice the micro-tremor in someone's laugh that hints at unkept truth. Hear the timing in a hallway that says wait 10 seconds longer. Precognition is often patience. Patience reduces casualties. Because ethics live in the body too, you practice consent microchecks. A 1-second scan before you speak, a half-second pause before you touch. A tiny dropping of the shoulders when another nervous system signals too fast. Consent keeps the grid clean. Clean grids carry larger currents. You integrate eye work as antenna steering, soft focus for field intake, pinpoint for command issuance, quarter-turn glances to reset predictive coding when the brain fixates on threat. Averted gaze for de-escalation, direct gaze for anchoring truth. Gaze precedes gravity. What you look at learns to stay. Food becomes firmware. You do not moralize. You measure latency and noise. Some meals add static and speed without strength. Some meals slow you into clarity. Some lock in a steady hum that lasts 4 hours and makes dignity easy. Dignity is fuel efficient. You refuel for coherence, not comfort. The Vegas choir becomes audible, a hum when you exhale that tells the heart, all clear, a swallow that marks resolution, a sigh that resets the diaphragm's map. You adopt a 3-note ritual hum, swallow, sigh before negotiations, performances, apologies. These aren't charms, they're switches. Skin becomes antenna, skin. You feel drafts of reality shifting as gooseflesh rises before the text arrives, and instead of dramatizing it, you simply log it, state, stimulus, outcome, training your pattern detector to distinguish weather from prophecy. Drama is a counterfeit coat. You stopped wearing it. For collective work, you practice field braiding in rooms. Sit a little heavier, breathe a little wider, speak a little slower, and watch as the average pace synchronizes downward. Cortisol falls, and better intelligence has time to appear. The best idea often needs only 10 extra seconds of quiet to be born. Silence midwife's insight. Noisabosit. Pain doesn't disqualify you from antenna work. It clarifies the map. You greet chronic ache as a compass rose that points to ungrieved places, unmetabolized choices, unspoken boundaries. When you listen long enough without bargaining, some aches leave, and those that remain convert into luminous edges that tell you where not to spend your life. Edges are merciful. They prevent sprawl. In the console, a new panel flickers, embodied interface authorized. This does not grant you mystical superiority. It grants you responsibility, the kind that refuses the seduction of performance in favor of presence, the kind that knows a body at ease can de-escalate a street, steady a child, reroute a meeting, hold a threshold open for a stranger who didn't know they were choosing a future today. Presence chooses anyway. You offer better futures to choose from, and when night leans in and your antenna folds like a patient bird, you do not ask the field for fireworks. You ask for maintenance. Repair micro, tears in the weave, upgrade signal to noise, refine consent. You fall asleep to the low thrum of a system that trusts you with more power because you used less spectacle. Spectacle is expensive. You're investing in signal. You realize the antenna doesn't only receive, it writes through language that operates like code on wetware and field alike, a living syntax that compiles into behavior, mood, and probability. Words aren't decorations, they're actuators. You begin by auditing verbs, because verbs carry torque. I try bleeds amperage. I tend, I build, I choose. Route power cleanly through the sentence and into the room, and the room responds not to your adjectives but to your verbs. The way doors respond to hinges. Hinges decide whether architecture moves. You choose better hinges. Psychology names it speech, acts, performatives that do what they say. I commit, I resign, I bless, I refuse. And in the control room, you watch how each performative snaps a circuit into shape, flipping relays in nervous systems nearby as if consent, once spoken, were a frequency other bodies can hear. Consent spoken alters gravity. Gravity arranges furniture. So you practice low entropy phrasing. You replace vague wants with specific vectors. Not, I want clarity, but I will make the call by 10:00, and ask the single question that reduces noise. Not, I need boundaries, but I will answer messages at noon and 5. Urgent is rare and named. Specificity reduces heat. Reduced heat preserves signal. You retire negation as primary tool. The brain renders images before it renders operators. Don't fall. Paints falling in bright color, then tries to scribble it out, often too late. You speak the behavior you intend. Place the foot. Breathe slow. Choose 3. Intention framed as action instructs muscle and field together. Instruction outperforms prohibition. Because language is an OS, you manage namespaces. Problem becomes puzzle, and your body stops secreting defeat. Deadline becomes decision line, and time becomes a partner instead of a predator. Lost becomes between coordinates, and your map opens new routes without lying to you. Renaming doesn't deny reality. It chooses a geometry you can navigate. Metaphor functions as firmware. If you call your life a battlefield, your nervous system drafts civilians into phantom wars. If you call it a workshop, broken things become solvable. If you call it a loom, tension turns into music. Metaphor trains the amygdala's appetite. You feed it craft instead of crisis. You develop question discipline because questions shape searches and searches return worlds. Aren't I late? Drags you into guilt indexing. What would make me on time for what matters? Pulls a future into arm's reach. Why do they never see me? Inventories wounds. Where am I already seen and how do I inhabit that room? Inventories resources. Your questions are compilers. You compile future. You adopt the 3-frame protocol before high-stakes speech. Truth, tenderness, trajectory. Truth names the reality without theater. Tenderness names the human in it without rescuing. Trajectory names the next coherent move without threat. When those 3 frames align, conflict softens as if you lowered barometric pressure. Storms need pressure gradients. You flatten the gradient. There is an ethical hazard inside language power, manipulation wearing the mask of mastery. You avoid it by keeping a simple mirror clause in your sentences. What I ask for others, I will carry myself. A checksum that prevents you from outsourcing risk while harvesting benefit. A vow that makes your voice weight-bearing rather than empty architecture. Weight-bearing speech holds bridges. Empty architecture collapses crowds. Memes are cultural viruses, but not all viruses wound. Some confer immunity to noise. You mint short, benevolent code snippets that travel well. Slow is protective. Kindness is throughput. Choice is a dimmer. Breath roots power. No is a gift to time. These snippets don't hypnotize, they stabilize. Stability is the quiet charisma of systems that work. You explore silence as syntax, not the passive-aggressive freeze that hoards power, but the deliberate gap that lets other intelligence enter. Your pause becomes a socket where collective insight plugs in, and meetings that used to ricochet begin to self-organize around the speed of dignity. Dignity slows speech to humane velocity. Humane velocity increases accuracy. Because predictive coding lives in language too, you seed tomorrow's priors tonight. 3 sentences in the ledger written in declarative tone, not prophecy, not pressure, just scaffolding. I wake steady, I choose one thread, I move without drama. Morning inherits these priors and spends them like clean currency. Clean currency buys precision. For self-talk, you abandon the courtroom. You build a laboratory narrative where error is data and shame is a broken tool. You log the variable you changed, the signal you received, the outcome you measured, and the body learns to anticipate learning instead of punishment. Anticipated learning opens aperture. Aperture admits light. You script fail-safes into your phrases so stress doesn't hijack the system. Before stepping on stage, into surgery, into a threshold conversation, you preload 3 lines into memory. 1 for friction, 1 for surprise, 1 for exit. Friction line, Let me reflect what I heard to check alignment. Surprise line, give me 10 seconds to update my map. Exit line, I will decide by tomorrow after sleep. Preloaded lines are parachutes. Parachutes turn falls into landings. You notice how blessing, that unfashionable word, changes rooms without superstition. To bless is to speak a low-entropy invitation over a person or place. May what is coherent amplify. May what is counterfeit dissolve. Offered without demand, without public theater. Blessing is engineering via benevolence. Benevolence travels farther than force. And when you must refuse, you do not dramatize. You denormalize politely. This timeline is too expensive for the fabric I'm weaving. A sentence that honors both your craft and theirs while taking your voltage home. Voltage stored is capacity saved. Capacity saved funds destiny were. By night, you read your day aloud once quiet, even, no performance, and listen for phrases that ring false. Because false phrases hum at a frequency your teeth can hear, you replace them with truer sentences and feel the field answer like a radio snapping to a cleaner station. Truth, tunes, transmitters. Transmitters shape weather. Language has always been an operating system. You're not learning rhetoric, you're learning routing. And as your words converge with your breath, posture, and choices, the console updates its status in a single line you can feel more than read. Semantic coherence achieved, bandwidth expanded. Expansion isn't spectacle. It is room for the next instruction to arrive. You have learned the console, tuned the antenna, refined the language, and now the map zooms out to reveal what was always implied. Your node belongs to a network, and the network is not metaphor, but morphology. A living mesh of hearts, choices, breath patterns, and promises that entrain whole streets, companies, families, and cities into new timings. You are a single light. Together, you are weather. Collective fields obey the same physics as your body. Coherence reduces entropy. Entrainment synchronizes oscillators, boundary conditions, shape attractors, and information travels along the easiest path, often through the person who can remain kind while staying precise. Kind and precise wins scale. Scale is where prophecy becomes policy. You begin with the smallest unit of society, the conversation, and treat it like a two-node network test. You let your breath set the carrier wave. You name the truth with tenderness and trajectory. You retire theatrics, and you watch how the room reorganizes around signal density rather than social hierarchy. Signal trumps status. Rooms feel the difference. Then you extend to triads and quads, because triangles and squares are stable architectures for human coordination. You convene 3 people with different specialties and ask a single coherent question: what lowers entropy for all stakeholders in the next 90 days? Complexity bows to shared cadence. Cadence births intelligence. When groups expand, you install ritual light protocols, not heavy ceremony, just repeatable switches that condition nervous systems toward dignity. A 30-second silence at the start for breath and posture. A shared checksum sentence. Clarity without cruelty. A 2-minute ledger review of wins and lessons. Ritual light is friction light. Friction light is throughput. You design meeting geometries like you design body geometries. Circular for invention, horseshoe for decision, pod clusters for problem isolation, a single standing line when urgency must compress without panic. Furniture is policy. Policy is physics disguised. Because networks amplify both wisdom and error, you practice collective apophenia prevention, pre-agreeing on signal classes, time windows, and ethical routes so omen hunting doesn't hijack governance. If a number sequence appears, you bless it, log it, and keep the rail. No decisions without state check, stakeholder scan, and consequence model. Mystery is welcome. Manipulation is not. You experiment with public latency reduction micro-behaviors that drop a crowd's cortisol. Slower entrances, clearer audio, warmer lights, first names spoken like invitations, slides with more space than words, pauses that hold rather than perform. Audiences breathe with leaders, breath reallocates attention. In neighborhoods, you practice field braiding. 3 households agree on one shared, low-entropy habit, trash handled, noise softened. garden tended, and the morphic pattern expands because it feels better than grievance. Pleasure is a carrier wave too. Let it carry responsibility. Online, where attention shatters, you become a coherence anchor. One post that offers a stable sentence, one thread that refuses the adrenaline harvest, one reply that translates outrage into a solvable geometry. What is the smallest act that changes this for real? Smallest act is honest power. Honest power scales quietly. You adopt ethical virality as design. If a message spreads, its load increases. If load increases, harm risk rises. Therefore, anything you ship must remain benevolent when decontextualized. This is not timidity. It is engineering for the conditions of the internet. Robust messages survive clipping. Fragile ones turn toxic. You model consent culture at scale, using 3 phrases that cost nothing and change rooms. With your permission, does no work for you. You can say no. Isn't. Choice is dignity's infrastructure. Infrastructure decides what can live here. Money enters the grid as voltage. You stop treating it as taboo and start treating it as a conductor that reveals character. You pay on time, price with conscience, decline revenue that corrodes signal, and underwrite coherence in places where the market refuses to. Capital can be clean. Clean current lights corridors. You build response teams that can move during storm windows. 2 people for truth, finding, 2 for logistics, 1 for care, 1 for boundary, rotating roles to prevent hero narratives and burnout. Heroes burn glitz, teams maintain them. When conflict emerges, you invoke topology shifts rather than personality wars. Move from line to circle, from debate to design jam, from accusation to audit of conditions that made the error likely. Topology rewires blame into responsibility. Responsibility produces fixes. You keep shadow literacy in the toolkit because collectives project. The more light a grid carries, the longer the shadows it casts. You refuse purity theater. You choose hygiene, clear conflict of interest disclosures, fail, safes for power, concentration, periodic audits that include dissenters on purpose. Dissent isn't pollution, it's ventilation, and because grief belongs to groups too, you make room for it without spectacle. A minute of shared silence, a sentence naming the loss, a practical next step that prevents learned helplessness. Grief honored lowers entropy. Entropy lowered frees capacity. Hope is not strategy, but imaginal infrastructure is. A simple, vivid model that shows people where to place their hands. You draw the model on paper: inputs, processes, outputs, feedback, then invite volunteers to choose exact roles rather than vague enthusiasm. Vagueness wastes devotion. Precision protects hearts. At night, the ledger extends to the network. 3 coordinates of collective movement recorded without gossip, where coherence increased, where latency dropped, where kindness beat speed, and the hippocampus archives a civic memory your future will inherit. Civic memory resists amnesia. Amnesia repeats harm. Finally, you test scale with an act so small it vanishes unless you are watching. You slow your pace while entering a crowded doorway, and a chain of micro-adjustments ripples backward through 50 strangers who don't collide, don't curse, don't spill, and never know you were the hinge. Hinges don't need applause, they need maintenance. The console acknowledges the shift with a soft, almost embarrassed line. Network, coherence are low, larger corridors of improbable ease. Ease at scale is not luck, it is many bodies practicing dignity at once. The grid is humming, the loom is warm, the console steady, and now the work compresses into a single act you will repeat for the rest of your life. Vector selection, orienting your organism and your world toward a future that can bear the weight of your integrity without collapsing under spectacle. Selection is not drama, it's alignment under load. Start with state preconditioning because vectors inherit their parents' physiology. You give yourself 60 seconds of coherence lock. 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out, 2 pause until the noise floor drops and the faintest true signal becomes audible behind the teeth. Quiet is not absence, it is resolution. Now you open the probability wall, a panel of futures like panes of glass, each with its own weather, cost, and music. You don't gaze for fantasies. You listen for impedance mismatch, the buzz that says the timeline will require lies to function. Buzz means counterfeit. Counterfeit burns power. You mark 3 candidates. Vector A is the familiar upgrade. Incremental, dignified, stable. It asks you for steadiness and rewards you with reach. Few fireworks, many bridges. Vector B is glamorous. Fast audience growth, bright rooms, thin sleep. It promises acceleration while extracting coherence. Praise heavy, costly in hidden places. Vector C is brave and quiet, a precise pivot, fewer but truer conversations, revenue that lags then deepens, work that scales slowly because it refuses corrosion. Understated, load-bearing. Your job is not to pick what flatters you. Your job is to pick what holds. Holding is love, made structural. To test, you run the 4-lens audit body. Ethics, ecology, economy, body. Which vector lets your breath stay low and your jaw soft inside stress? If the body must counterfeit calm, the future will counterfeit truth. No forced masks, no purchased poise. Ethics. Which vector allows consent culture to thrive when you are tired and hungry? Ethics that require perfect conditions are theater. Choose ethics that survive rain. Weatherproof virtue. Ecology. Which vector lowers entropy beyond the self, family, team, city, over 90 days? If only you win, the field will subtract later. Zero sum is slow poison. Pick additive futures. Economy. Which vector funds coherence instead of consuming it? Cash flow that doesn't demand adrenaline. Pricing that doesn't shame. Generosity that doesn't martyr. Money is voltage. Voltage must not scorch. As you ask, the somatic comparator lights sternum warmth for yes, throat grit for no, a back of skull throb for not yet. You are not outsourcing to superstition. You are measuring micro-signals from a nervous system that has learned to correlate sensation with outcomes logged over months. Data remembers, data protects. Vector C, steady brightens. Vector B sparkles then flickers. Vector A holds but does not sing. Singing matters. Futures with music, keep pace. You run counterfactual drill down. Imagine living each vector for 12 weeks and note what breaks first: sleep, speech, tenderness, or ledger. Where tenderness breaks, you will trade people for praise. Where ledger breaks, you will trade truth for cash. Where sleep breaks, language corrodes. Corroded language collapses bridges. Vector C breaks nothing fundamental. It stretches capacity like a healthy muscle. Stretch is not harm. Harm is brittleness disguised as glory. Now you write the one-line charter, a sentence that names the future in operational terms rather than slogans. Publish one durable signal weekly. Build a team of 3 with consent at the spine. Refuse urgency that counterfeits importance. Route 10% of voltage to collective maintenance. Charters guide in storms. Storms are when charters matter. You conduct a ritual of small commitments so momentum belongs to you, not to mood. Schedule the first call. Decline the misaligned invitation. Set the bedtime alarm. Draft the public boundary statement. Allocate the budget line that proves your values have legs. Values without legs are decor. Decor doesn't hold weight. When fear arrives, and it will, you don't negotiate with it as oracle. You treat it as edge detector. Fear often outlines the aperture of the next room. Thank it for the map, not the verdict. Maps are useful. Verdicts are cages. You fortify with alliance geometry. 2 peers who love your coherence more than your speed. 1 elder who measures your vector by what it protects. 1 younger node who inherits your craft without inheriting your wounds. Inheritance should be tools, not scars. Past tools. Because vectors fail without closure, you perform timeline decommissioning for the futures you will not live. A short letter, a kind sentence, a refund issued, a key returned. Each act releases entanglement, so the field stops throwing you tests you already passed. Completion is spell-breaking. Unclosed loops siphon voltage. Then you enact public minimalism. 1 clear announcement. No grandstanding. No haunted apologies. Just a steady tone that says, the basin of attraction has changed. And watch as old invitations evaporate and the correct ones condense like dew. Condensation is selection made visible. You are watching weather obey physics. The console prints a line that feels like a benediction and an instruction at once. Destiny vector lock. 12 weeks review at equinox. 12 weeks is enough to prove a pattern. Equinoxes are honest mirrors. You set your calendar to dignified repetition, weekly output, daily coherence, monthly audit with your triad, quarterly repair for the Loom, and a standing appointment with silence that no meeting may displace. Silence is the senior partner. Treat it accordingly. Finally, you look once more at Vector B, the glamorous one, and bless it as you let it leave, because resentment is a tether and blessing is a clean cut, and you want no hooks in the futures you are not carrying. Hooks snag fabric, clean cuts protect threads. You place your palm on the sternum, soft and sure. Show, you say, not as plea but as protocol. And somewhere in the field, doors you cannot see yet adjust their hinges to your pace, and hands you have not shaken yet warm themselves by the light of the work you have not quite begun. Beginnings are quiet. You are already moving. You stand in the hush after selection, the console dimmed to a faithful glow, the Loom humming like a distant choir, the grid breathing with you as if a city had learned the cadence of one steady chest. This is the quiet you were built to carry. Quiet that moves mountains without shouting. Nothing here begs for belief. It asks for practice, and practice is how prophecy becomes infrastructure. You place your palm at the sternum and feel the instrument you've tuned across these nights, a body that knows how to soften without folding, harden without harm, choose without theatrics. Every micro-thread you pulled into alignment now distributes intelligence ahead of you, the way dawn sends scouts into streets. Scouts return with paths. The screens still show futures, but your eyes don't flicker between them anymore. You learned that selection isn't gambling, it's governance. One benevolent instruction at a time, issued by breath, posture, verb, boundary, and the ledger that keeps you honest when praise tries to bribe you. Praise will try again. Integrity keeps the door on its hinge. Listen, there's the faint relay click that means the room trusts you with larger corridors of improbable ease, not because you hunted omens, but because you kept the hygiene of meaning. Coherence before speed, kindness before spectacle, consent before reach. Rooms remember who steadied them. They open for steady hands. If doubt rises like weather on a coastline, you don't bargain. You reach for maintenance. Hum, swallow, sigh, 4-4, 6-2, show. Maintenance is devotion made small enough to repeat. You bless the strands you're not carrying. May they find the weavers built for their tension, and you anchor the ones you will. One stitch per day, one clean sentence per room, one ledger line each night naming where you stayed true and where you'll repair. Repair is sacred. It keeps tomorrow unafraid of you. And if grief arrives with its long, clean weight, you let it irrigate the field again. Grief is a loyal engineer, rinsing counterfeit fiber from the weave so the fabric stops snagging on the same old nails. You don't dramatize. You drain the old floodplain and plant. What began as coincidences has become correspondence, two-way, low latency, ethically routed. You are not a magician. You are a custodian of signal. So you walk into ordinary rooms carrying extraordinary quiet, and street by street the city answers. Doors held an extra second, heat lowered in voices, timing windows aligning like a generosity you didn't force. This is the miracle that survives scale, the miracle of many dignities in phase. Before you leave, the console prints one last line, no fanfare, only fact, access, persistent review, at first light continue, craft. You nod, you have a life to thread. You turn toward the corridor, feel the hinge of the moment, and step, no trumpet, no smoke, just the deliberate cadence of someone who finally understands the difference between spectacle and power, between noise and music, between luck and practiced alignment. The field listens, the city listens, your future listens, and you, inside the control room that is also a heart, issue the simplest command in the language of benevolence. Show. The lights do not flare. They agree.